I think most, if not all, Bears fans are in agreement, even Bears media, in alignment and agreement, that Matt Nagy's in over his head, he's a bad head coach, and he will be fired after Sunday's game against the Vikings. Feels pretty safe that we agree with those three things. What happens with the rest of the Bears, like front office, and what comes next remains to be seen. But of course, you have a lot of Bears fans now thinking about the team's next head coach. And admittedly, I have not put a ton of thought into that because personally, my focus has been more on the leadership of the organization. You can't change the ownership necessarily, but it all starts with Ted Phillips in terms of the people that you can change. And that's where the change has to start, with Ted Phillips and Ryan Pace. I've been spending a lot more time thinking about those that should be the next team president and the general manager. Like, I'm thinking big picture, and of course a lot of the media and Bears fans are thinking wrong. They're thinking small picture, because there's a very good chance, knowing the Bears and Goofy George, and being Counting Tad, that Ryan Pace may not get fired. And not only that, may be able to stay GM or maybe even get promoted, because nothing says caring about winning and a commitment to excellence like rewarding mediocrity like Ryan Pace has demonstrated the past 7 seasons. So that's where my focus has been more so. Because firing Nagy is only dealing with a symptom. It doesn't cure the cause, the virus. But nonetheless, for the potential chance that Nagy is the only head that rolls on Black Monday here for this Bears organization, it's time to at least have a little bit of a conversation. And one of the big names, obviously, that's coming up when it comes to a lot of Bears fans and thinking about the next head coach of the team is Jim Harbaugh. And I knew this was going to happen. It was going to be inevitable, especially as Michigan has enjoyed, in 2021, their best success they've had since Jim Harbaugh took over there. I understand. You're talking about a guy, former first-round pick of the Chicago Bears in 1987 out of Michigan. He was a quarterback for the team through the beginning of the Wanstead days, believe it or not, 1992. Like, he even outlasted Ditka by a year in Chicago. So there's that Bears football approach of, hey, it would mean more to him to win in Chicago. He's a former Chicago player, and we like that, son bitch. Last time the team won a Super Bowl, it was with the former Bears player, Coach Ditka. Bears football! But all my smart-assness aside, there is no question that Jim Harbaugh is infinitely better as a head coach, specifically an NFL head coach, than Matt Nagy. Like, if we can't agree on that basic fact, then there's a problem. He absolutely is. He has a history of, whether it be San Diego State and then Stanford, and then even when you talk about San Francisco, like coming in and turning shit around really quickly. He has relevant NFL head coaching experience, relevant NFL success that isn't 2 or 3 decades ago. He was the head coach of the 49ers for 4 seasons from 2011 to 2014. During that time, he had a 44-18 regular season record. The 49ers won 2 division titles, made 3 straight playoff appearances between 2011 and 2013. And not only 3 straight playoff appearances, but if you remember, 3 straight NFC championship game appearances from the 2011 through 2013 seasons. And they won an NFC championship in that 2012 season, and that was even with him making the midseason quarterback switch from Alex Smith to Colin Kaepernick. What certainly excites Bears fans, I think, talking about this is that he went to a Super Bowl with Kaepernick as his guy, who was a mid-quarterback at best in the league, and helped another mid-quarterback in Alex Smith play up what to that point in time was easily his best football of his career. And you're talking about a guy that has legitimate NFL head coaching experience, which is rare to find in the marketplace, and not just NFL head coaching experience, but quality, highly successful experience. Those types of guys do not grow on trees. Those types of guys do not come available every day. So I totally get it from that respect that when you're talking about Harbaugh, This is a guy, has a good track record for building staffs. Like Vic Fangio was his defensive coordinator in San Francisco. Greg Roman was his offensive coordinator. Like, that was a big key to his success. But you look at him and you say, this is a guy that's won big games in the NFL. And his team was really good for a short period of time in the NFL. And while it took him a bit longer at Michigan, which has traditionally, historically been one of the most overrated college football programs there fucking is. Name me 3 that are more overrated. Can you name me 2 or 1? Even going back to the damn Bo Schembechler days. That program's always been as overrated as shit. So for him to get Michigan to the college football playoff is a bit of a minor miracle. So do I think there's a chance that Jim Harbaugh is just using the option of the NFL as potential leverage to get himself more money at Michigan? Yes. Do I think there's also a chance that Harbaugh realizes this is by far the best team I've had at Michigan and we couldn't even make it to the finals of the college football playoff? I'm never going to win a national title here, which he's certainly correct about. So I might as well go back to the NFL while I can and while my stock is as high as it's been in a long time. That is certainly also possible. Is it possible that he's interested in the Chicago Bears job? Absolutely. Is it possible that he's also interested in another job like the Denver Broncos or specifically the Las Vegas Raiders? Yes. I would even lean to them and say, especially with the Raiders, he has an established quarterback in Derek Carr, new, marquee stadium, a more West Coast type of team. And Harbaugh, as much as you think about him in Bears football and Midwest, he's a West Coast guy. So you look at his first NFL, but college head coaching jobs were West Coast teams in California, and so was his NFL gig. So there's certainly something there. But I get why Bears fans look at this and say, he's an instant big-time upgrade over the last guy you had. He certainly brings offensive chops. You're thinking that he's going to do wonders with Justin Fields. He's going to do wonders with the offense, that this team needs to make a splash and a big splash and a culture changer, and Captain Khakis is just that guy. I get it. There are certainly far worse options that the Chicago Bears could bring in to be their next head coach. But I don't think Bears fans should be as giggly tits for this possibility as they are right now. Personally, to me, the timing for this would have been much better in 2015 or 2018. That's when I think the timing was more right. You're talking about a guy here in Jim Harbaugh who's now been away from the NFL for 7, almost 8 years. Like, that matters. That's a bit of a time away. And it wasn't exactly like he was running an revolutionary NFL offense the last time he was in the league, and the league's gotten even more sophisticated and pass-happy in terms of offensive structure and scheme. Is he going to be up to snuff? And do you really want a guy that you saw his offense just get boat raced by Georgia in the college football playoff semifinals? Do you really think he is automatically the answer to the Bears' offensive woes and Justin Fields' long-term development? I don't know about all that. Because when you look back at those San Francisco teams, and a lot of fans and media are bringing up the San Francisco years, like, we can talk about the San Francisco years, but let's really talk about the San Francisco years. The reality is, he benefited those 4 years in San Francisco from an elite level defense. Not a pretend elite defense like the Bears claim to have. A real legit elite defense in San Francisco with the Patrick Willises of the world and the, Aldon Smiths of the world and the Navarro Bowmans of the world. Like, that was an actual elite defensive unit that helped prop up a mediocre to below average offense. Like, you look at the defensive and offensive rankings for Harbaugh's 4 years in San Francisco, they tell a much different story than what a lot of people are trying to tell you. In 2011, his first year there, big turnaround, yes. But they were second in the league in points allowed, 4th in yards allowed defensively, only 11th in points scored offensively, and 26th in yards allowed. That's a mediocre to bad offense. 2012, similar story, 2nd in points allowed, 3rd in yards allowed. You flip over to the offense, 11th in points scored per game and 11th in yards per game. Again, just above average, and that was by far their best season offensively was 2012. And that's when they made the switch in midseason or a little after midseason to go from Alex Smith to Kaepernick. But you never really saw Kaepernick grow and develop. And even if you say, well, Alex Smith played much better under him. Okay, compared to what previous coaching? Also, Alex Smith stayed healthier, which he had a bit of a problem doing early on in his San Francisco career. And you can also certainly point out to the fact that Alex Smith enjoyed his best years in Kansas City under Andy Reid. That last season, who was calling the plays the last half of that 2017 season? Matt Nagy! So let's not make out Jim Harbaugh to be this sophisticated offensive wizard or genius, because at the NFL level, the evidence just doesn't support that. It's not there. And he had guys like Frank Gore that he could count on. He basically won playing Bears football. Big time defense, running game, special teams. Protect the ball. Is that the type of football you want to be playing now? Bears football. To me, it feels like we'd be going right back down the same path and approach we always do. Bears football! Now, some of you might point to and say, well, your point about he's never won a championship at any level, college or NFL, well, you know, that doesn't automatically mean he can't win one here in Chicago. And I'll grant you that. And you're hoping that he'd be like a Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll was a 2-time failed head coach in the NFL. Went to USC and baby, he cheated to win and did it right and won a couple of national championships. Comes back to the NFL at age 58, which Harbaugh would be looking to do here, coming back to the NFL at age 58. And in his decade plus in Seattle, Pete Carroll went to 2 Super Bowls, won a Super Bowl. So obviously that was a big success. Difference being, though, he went to USC at a real marquee program, and he dominated the college football landscape for many years and won national titles, something Jim Harbaugh has not done. You could also go to the John Gruden example if you want to say, well, you know, he's out of the NFL for several years, but at least he's in coaching. Gruden wasn't, but he was around the game all the time. Won a Super Bowl with Tampa, out of the league for a decade, but he was always around the game doing commentary, Monday Night Football, all that shit. And he came back and he was mid to bad. Maybe you're looking at the Mike Ditka examples. The last Bears coach to win a Super Bowl was a former Bears player, but that's a long, long time ago. Stop, Bears. Now when you say, Bears football, it's not a good thing. And it's not the Bears, it's the Bears. Look, here's my point with Jim Harbaugh. I worry that the timing's not right. The timing was probably better in 2015, 2018. There is also a tendency, when you look at his resume, like he spends a few years in his place and he tends to wear out his welcome pretty quickly. Certainly happened in San Francisco. You can blame Trent Baalke, and there's certainly nothing to say that that wasn't a big part of it, but it wasn't just him. The 49ers organization was happy to get rid of Harbaugh, which was crazy for a guy that had had so much success there. He was a guy that enjoyed his success at the NFL level off the strength of his defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio, and that elite level 49ers defense. Like, let's not get it twisted. He was not some offensive genius. His offenses did not carry the way. They just didn't. So how much different is he? I mean, seriously. Just because he's better than Matt Nagy doesn't mean much. That should not ultimately be the low bar and mediocre standard that we set here. Harbaugh has a reputation, yes, for coming in and turning around things relatively quickly. But he also has never had to deal with the fucking McCaskey family and potentially Bean Count and Ted and maybe even Pretty Boy Pace. Like, shit's just different. Like, you have to come at this and say, you're going to pay him a shit ton of money and that you're giving him 4 to 5 years to win a championship. If you feel like Jim Harbaugh is a guy that has a head coach that can do that, so be it. But I see nothing in his pedigree or resume that says he's going to be able to do that. Will he even be able to, assemble the same quality staff that he had in frickin' San Francisco? I don't know about that. Is his offense going to be even more boring and even more kind of behind the modern NFL like it was in San Francisco now that he's been out of the league for 8 years? It could be. I don't know. But I certainly wouldn't think he's going to come in and be some offensive mastermind all of a sudden. Like, yes, he's better than a lot of other fucking names you hear. I'd much rather have a Jim Harbaugh than another former Bear like Leslie Frazier. I grant you that. But for those that are so geeked up about the possibility of Jim Harbaugh, he might not even end up with the Bears. He may choose the Raiders. And even if he does choose the Bears, Don't be so cocksure that he's ultimately the answer that you're seeking.